Asterisk. This is the story of one of the most shocking and widely discussed cases in recent American religious history. A case that shook the foundations of a megachurch empire, rattled political circles, and forced millions to rethink how power, faith, and unchecked authority can collide in devastating ways. Today, we look at the rise, fall, and conviction of Pastor Robert Morris, founder of one of the largest evangelical churches in the United States, former spiritual advisor to high-profile political leaders, and now a registered sex offender who admitted in court to sexually abusing a 12-year-old girl in the 1980s. Asterisk. The story begins more than 4 decades ago. In 1982, in the small Oklahoma town of Hominy, a young girl 12 years old at the time was growing up with her family when a 21-year-old traveling evangelist named Robert Morris entered their home. He was charismatic, ambitious, and beginning what would later become a highly influential religious career. He stayed with the family, prayed with them, spent time with their children, and quickly gained their trust. But according to the survivor, behind this mask of spiritual devotion was something far darker. Asterisk. Over the next several years, the girl says Morris groomed her, manipulated her, and repeatedly abused her, sometimes in her family home, sometimes during church-related visits, and sometimes in settings where he had isolated her from others. She describes that she was confused, frightened, and far too young to understand the gravity of what was happening. She didn't have the language to speak about it. She didn't know where to go. And she believed that this young preacher who used the language of God, purity, and spiritual guidance held unchallengeable authority. Asterisk. The trauma that began in the early 1980s haunted her for decades. She eventually moved away, built a life, but carried the weight of silence that so many survivors of childhood abuse know too well. Meanwhile, Robert Morris continued to rise, building Gateway Church in 2000 and transforming it into one of the most powerful megachurches in America. His sermons aired nationwide. His conferences sold out. His influence reached political leaders, celebrities, and millions of followers. He was seen as a mentor, a visionary, a respected Christian leader. And then, after nearly 40 years, the truth finally broke through the silence. Asterisk. In 2024, the survivor, now an adult, came forward publicly, revealing her story in detail. She accused Morris of abusing her for years when she was a minor. The revelation sent shockwaves through the evangelical world. A pastor once considered untouchable was now at the center of a criminal investigation. Gateway Church immediately came under intense scrutiny. Questions arose. Did church leadership know anything earlier? Were earlier warnings ignored? How many people had remained silent out of loyalty, fear, or institutional pressure? Asterisk. Within days of the allegations becoming public, Robert Morris resigned from Gateway Church. The resignation alone was historic, one of the most powerful megachurch leaders in the country suddenly stepping down. Not for a minor scandal, not for misconduct with an adult, but for an accusation of child sexual abuse. Asterisk. As investigators dug deeper, the allegations moved into the courtroom. In March 2025, Morris was indicted on 5 felony counts related to lewd and indecent acts with a child. He was arrested, booked, and released on bond. And for the first time in decades, the legal system was preparing to address what happened in that Oklahoma home in the 1980s. Asterisk. What happened next stunned many observers. After months of legal negotiations, Robert Morris appeared in an Oklahoma courtroom in October 2025 and pleaded guilty. He did not deny the crimes. He did not claim innocence. He did not fight the evidence. Standing before the judge and his accuser, he admitted to sexually abusing a 12-year-old child. Asterisk. The case that had lingered in silence for decades was now a matter of public record. Asterisk. But the controversy did not end with the guilty plea. The plea deal negotiated between the prosecution and defense resulted in a 10-year suspended sentence. Morris would serve only 6 months in county jail. After release, he would remain under strict supervision, register as a sex offender for life, and pay financial restitution to the survivor. The light sentence sparked immediate outrage. Legal experts argued that the punishment did not match the severity of the crime. Social workers pointed out that survivors of childhood abuse often endure lifelong trauma. Many members of the public asked why someone with immense influence and wealth received such leniency. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Social media erupted with anger, disbelief, and frustration. The survivor herself spoke powerfully after the sentencing, saying that while the conviction mattered, the 6-month jail time felt like an insult and acknowledgement of guilt without meaningful accountability. Judges defend plea deals as necessary, pointing to old cases, fading evidence, and the need to avoid re-traumatizing survivors with lengthy trials. But critics insist that justice should never be compromised, simply because the crime happened long ago, especially when the reason remained hidden was the fear and shame inflicted by the abuser himself. As the legal process concluded, attention turned back to Gateway Church. Documents, emails, internal communications, and testimonies suggested that the church may have been aware of allegations or suspicious behavior earlier than it admitted publicly. Some reports claimed that in the mid-2000s, concerns were raised but not thoroughly investigated. Others suggested that language used by church leaders minimized the nature of the abuse, referring to it as a moral failure or an inappropriate relationship, mischaracterizing what was in fact the sexual abuse of a child. The survivor and her father later filed a civil lawsuit against Morris, Gateway Church, and several leaders, alleging defamation, retaliation, and concealment. This lawsuit argues that the church failed to acknowledge the crime and instead attempted to protect its public image. The outcome of that civil case remains ongoing, but it has opened broader conversations about institutional responsibility in religious communities. The case raises deeper questions about megachurch culture, centralized authority, and the danger of elevating charismatic leaders without proper checks and balances. Gateway Church, like many megachurches, grew rapidly fueled by strong personalities, emotional preaching, coordinated media, and massive financial influence. But critics argue that such institutions often lack transparency, accountability, and oversight. When a single individual holds enormous spiritual, financial, and political power, misconduct can remain hidden, and victims can feel powerless to challenge the system. The survivor's story has now become a voice for many others. She describes years of emotional struggle, difficulty trusting people, anxiety, and a long journey toward healing. Her public courage has inspired other survivors to come forward, not just in churches, but in schools, sports, and families. Child abuse survivors often wait decades to break their silence. Some never do. Cases like this highlight why the broader society now faces uncomfortable but necessary truths. Abuse thrives in silence. Institutions often protect themselves over victims. Influential people may receive more lenient treatment than ordinary citizens. And survivors carry wounds long after their abusers have built successful careers. This documentary does not exist to sensationalize one man's downfall. It exists to shed light on the systems that allow these tragedies to happen and to recognize the bravery of those who step forward after years of fear. It serves as a reminder that faith, morality, and public respect mean nothing when actions betray the innocent. Now that Morris has been convicted, the question remains, what happens next? For the survivor, healing continues. For Gateway Church, trust must be rebuilt. For the justice system, scrutiny continues over how plea deals are made in crimes involving minors. And for society, the case is a stark lesson on the dangers of unchecked power. In the end, The story of Robert Morris is not simply about a fall from grace. It is about the fight for justice after decades of silence. It is about how institutions respond when their leaders are exposed. It is about the power of survivors' voices, even after years of being unheard. And it is a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it is justice that must be demanded. Fought for and protected. This case will continue to influence conversations around church accountability, child safety, and legal reform. And long after the headlines fade, the survivor's courage will remain a powerful testimony, proving that the truth, no matter how old, must always come out.